Hello and welcome to TheoGeeks Ep.2. I'm your host, David Russell, along with my good friend and co-host on this adventure, Dale Glover. What's up, Dale?
Hey, what's up, David? How's it going?
Man, I just returned, buddy. It's been a long month.
I,
I
I
only had
just
planned
re-
to take 2 weeks.
I just realized I messed up because I was just watching your show with Nick Peters and Aaron, and I shouldn't be asking how are things. That could be offensive to people, so I'll just say hi.
Hi. Yeah, man, it was a long month. I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be in the chair again. I've
Mm,
been posting that I was returning. So, but yeah, it was an interesting time. We went down to Puerto Rico to take care of my mother, who's suffering from two forms of cancer in her bone and in her lung, and it's a tough thing. It's a
mhm.
tough process. So if anybody's out there and the prayer warriors out there, just keep praying for me and pray for my mom. We're trying to, just do our best to keep it all together and praying for her healing and so forth. I had a theme while I was down there. It was Matthew chapter 8 verses 1, and I think it goes up to 3. I can't remember off the top of my head, but the theme was Jesus is walking around, and these big crowds are following him, and this leper comes to him and uh, approaches him and falls on his knees and said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus says, "I am willing." And he, reached out his hand and touched the guy, and he was cleansed. So I read that over and over again to my mom, and it was a humbling experience to just be there to, pray for her and to serve her in that capacity. But I also got to talk to some other guys about God that I thought was pretty good. So I ended up going on mission while I was down there. So instead of just a service trip, it became a mission trip too, almost in a way. So I felt like Jesus and having dinner with the tax collectors. It was like, this is an interesting time. Interesting time. But yeah,
Take advantage of every opportunity that God throws your way.
yeah, absolutely, man. So how have you been, man?
Yeah, I've been good on my end. Nowhere near as interesting stories as you got, but I've mostly been working on my area readings and stuff like that this for the spring semester, trying to get that wrapped up. My essays on the Evil God Challenge and the Hiddenness of God. I'm also working on solo shows for Real Seekers. Finally, now I have some time to try and get certain promises I made to listeners done. So things like Jesus Mythicism, Shroud solo shows, um, finished off my cosmological argument, stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I really liked how you did the cosmological argument. You were very thorough in how you explained things. You go further than you would say like a William Lane Craig in his books, or uh, um, on like Defenders or something. You know what I mean?
For sure, yeah, and that's what I like to do. Like some people, I think it's great to have more popular level or intermediate level, but I want to do my best to cover it as thoroughly as I can to like check off all the bases. Um, yeah, so people can follow.
It makes for a long show though.
It
I was
does.
sitting there 2 hours
It does, but the way I
listening
see it,
to.
it's like a resource thing. So like
Yeah.
if you're interested in a specific issue, you can listen to like that part. You don't have to listen to the whole thing. But
Yeah, yeah, and not only that, but like you can, depending on where you're driving to, you listen to it in segments. So when I would go to work, I work about an hour away. I was able to listen to it both ways. So,
awesome, awesome.
but
So what's your synopsis? How bad was I?
no, you did good, man. I think you, like I said, I mean, you explained Hilbert's Hotel, I think, brilliantly. I think it was easier to understand the way you explained it than it was for me to listen to it by Craig.
Hmm,
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, and then you went into the topics a little bit more. The only criticism that I think I would have is you speak to skeptics too much.
Yeah,
You address them. It's like you're trying to have a conversation with them in the ether, you know. So it's like, but it's cool. It works for you, and it helps you with how you teach, and that's cool. You know, I think it worked, and I think you did a great job. So
awesome. Thank you very much. That means a lot. And I'll try to cut out the skeptic stuff. Bear in mind, a lot of that was recorded when I was on SNS a couple of years ago. So yeah, thanks for your take.
Yep, no problem, man. Travis is in the chats here,
Right.
and I am seeing if he wants to join us.
Right. Well, we should announce the topic for people. So this is Russell's. Well, yeah, you take it away.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. So, guys, today on TheoGeeks, we are actually going to be jumping into Genesis. And yeah, we banter a little bit, as you see. We talk about life and family and craziness and what's going on with us. But we try to break the ice that way. But as a topic, we're going to be getting into Genesis. I wanted to cover like this in a Bible study format so we can discuss the theology for you guys and discuss our thoughts on where that takes us, what we think about Genesis as a whole. So yeah, Dale, any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of Genesis, I think that the first place to start, that when you emailed me the topic, is there's certain questions that any commentator will want to ask, about the author, dating, genre of the text, stuff like that, before you actually get into reading it. So I don't know if you want to start there.
Sure, we certainly can. So, well, let's start out. What is Genesis? All right. So I mean, that's kind of like the main focus. Well, obviously, it's the first book of the Bible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and what does it cover? It covers a lot of stuff. I mean, what we get like 50 chapters in Genesis, 54, something like that. It's extensive,
Yeah.
and it's a book on beginnings, and that's what I want to. That's what I want to cover. I want to go into it, piece by piece, and cover as much as we can, because obviously there's a lot to discuss. There's young Earth creationism out there, old Earth creationism out there, a mix of the mytho history view, like you were talking about, and there's just so many different ones, and we have to examine each and every one, or at least talk about it. Maybe not in length, but we'll be talking about it. So I was like, let's do it. Let's do Genesis. And it's a story about origins. And if I keep rambling, Dale, just cut me off.
Okay. Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything Russell's saying. It's a story about the origins, right? The beginning of the universe and creation. We get that great doctrine, creatio ex nihilo, out of that shows the great power of our God. And then it strolls into the beginnings of man, the fall, and then goes into ending off with the patriarchs and that sort of thing. So we get the foundations for everything that we believe as Christians. So yeah, I fully agree with you in terms of what Genesis is about. Yeah.
As it implies, Genesis is about beginnings. Genesis tells us that God created everything that exists. It shows that God is both the creator and the ruler of all creation. I really hold to that. But it also tells us of humanity's tragic fall into sin and death, and of God's unfolding plan of redemption through his covenant with Abraham and his descendants. So Genesis includes some of the most memorable stories in the Bible, beginning with Adam and Eve, chapters 1-4, continuing through Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and ending with the life of Joseph, who died before 1600 BC, traditionally. Jews and Christians have recognized Moses as the author, writing after the Exodus from Egypt, commonly dated around 1440 through 1260 or something like that. There's always debate on the date when Moses compiled his story. But what I think is interesting, though, is that Genesis, and there's evidence of this, that the structures of Genesis not only reflects the culture of the second millennium BC, but it reflects the political and cultural setting of it. And I thought that was really interesting too.
Mm-hmm.
But that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I almost fully agree. I might need so you're absolutely right that Genesis. There's been lots of work in terms of archaeology and that sort of thing that kind of confirms. My own position, I do believe in Moses' authorship of the Book of Genesis as well as the Pentateuch, by and large. There could be some people like young earth creationists and that say, well, maybe there was Moses was using previously written documents and incorporating that into his text. So there is that thesis in terms of authorship as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that Moses was the principal author of Genesis, and I take the traditional dating, so 1400s BC. So that would mean that Joseph, I think some people put him into the time of the Hyksos with the Egyptian things and stuff like that. But that's where I am in terms of authorship and dating. In terms of go ahead.
I mean, I think I think there could have been an oral tradition that was around for Moses to glean from, because we do know that the Jews developed a controlled oral tradition. So unlike soft or uncontrolled oral tradition, that could change over time. The Jews were very precise in their controlled oral tradition, and that's reflected throughout the entire Old Testament. It's reflected through the cultural, the socio-cultural background. So I mean, you can see that, and I think that gives us a reliable footing when it comes to understanding what they're writing about and how it was transmitted, and it produces a reliability in my opinion.
Gotcha. So you would, just out of curiosity, you think it was purely oral sources for Moses? There wasn't any like written thing?
I don't think, you got to remember, like, okay, so if writing was expensive in Jesus's day, and it was even more rare in Moses's day, imagine how much more expensive that would be. So it was, if these people were tribal and nomadic, I'm sure that they had probably more of an oral tradition than they did a written tradition. However, when you look at the different writings of that time, and this is why this is one of the areas that I kind of take it more of a traditional stance, is that a lot of modern scholarship will talk about what is it that some of these religions come first, some of these Semitic, or not Semitic, but Sumerian religions come first, and because we have writings that date back older than Genesis. But if you look at the structure that they produce, Genesis parallels the type of structure, and that just tells me that there is an oral tradition, and not only that, but the background, the socio-cultural background, and the political settings and stuff like that, they all are around the same time, and they reflect around the same time. So I don't look at people saying, well, they had to have borrowed or they had to have taken it from this and that. I'm just like, no, I think they, maybe they didn't. Maybe they just came around the same time, and there's a common pool, that they all, some events like the flood, or for example, that they all were like, okay, and they wrote their own stories, but to say that one is older than the other, I just don't think there's much evidence in that way. It's just a guess, because you have something that's maybe older, as far as written down, like on a metal plate, or stone or whatever, because they didn't use I don't think they used papyrus all the time. I don't think they used it at all back then.
Tablets and stuff.
Yeah, so they use different tablets, that metal, and so forth. And I just think those stories all existed in that time frame. I don't think that one borrowed from this or one borrowed from that. I think that they're all kind of pulling from, like, okay, this is a common event. This is what happened. This is how we started. And I have this take on it. And Genesis is like, no, 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 I have this take on it. And it's kind of an apologetic in a way, like saying, no, God did this. It's not these gods, and y'all are So I think there's an apologetic thread in it. So, but go ahead, Dale. I'm rambling.
Yeah, no. Okay, so a couple issues I want to bring up then. So in the first place, I think you make a great point, and one that I fully agree with you on is that there's parallel mania among a lot of atheists and skeptics who just kind of assume, well, everything in Genesis was obviously copied by the chronologically prior writings, like, for example, the Eridu Genesis, or some other Babylonian myths, or even Egyptian myths and stuff like that. And Genesis just copied that. I think that's complete rubbish. It shows no nuance in understanding. That's just engaging in parallelomania. Scholars are actually much more cautious about this. So that there are certain criteria. In the first place, if you're going to say one thing borrowed from another, you have to meet at least 3 criteria. So, this comes from scholar Dr. Samuel Sandmel, for example. And he would say, well, first you have to prove that there is actually a parallel, that the two texts do actually parallel each other in the first place. Secondly, you have to prove that there's a causal connection between these texts. One text borrowed from another, they're causally linked in that way. And then thirdly, you'll have to show that that causal connection is asymmetrical, so that one Genesis borrowed that way as opposed to both borrowing from each other. And there is a good example that Dr. William Lane Craig gives, where he shows the example of how scholars actually determine when a parallel has happened. And coincidentally, interestingly enough, it's the Babylonians copying the Bible, not the other way around. So that's with the story of the flood, for example. Because we have their previous text or whatever, which doesn't mention certain details, such as the birds. That only comes in with the Bible. And then the Epic of Gilgamesh comes in, 500 BC, whenever it was written in the mid first millennium BC. Now, all of a sudden, it's got the details of the birds. So most scholars think the Babylonians were copying the Jews. They became familiar with their literature during the exile. So it's the opposite way. So, yeah, just wanted to mention that nuance. And I have a second point that's not related to myth. So I'll let you go.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, so the other thing I wanted to bring up was related to authorship. And you mentioned that there's certain verisimilitudes in the book of Genesis and stuff like that. So, sometimes skeptics will give the old documentary hypothesis, the JEDP authors. There's also the new documentary hypothesis, which is perhaps we can get into some of the differences there. It's a lot more nuanced, but still, it's this notion. There's a later writer. It wasn't Moses and stuff like that. But I think there's a lot of scholarship from archaeology proving that there are so many details and undesigned coincidences in Genesis that make it seem more probable that the author dates far earlier than the Babylonian period.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think the stories that reflect that culture back then is important too. But yeah, I hear you, man. So as we get into this, man, is there anything else that we need to do before we actually read some scripture here?
I think we kind of covered it. Yeah, I think the other thing I was thinking of, we can cover when we read it. But yeah, one thing in terms of the genre of the text. You kind of alluded. I sort of see Genesis chapters 1 to 11 as being the genre of mytho-history.
Okay. You want to talk about the different various views? Okay. Yeah. So you're looking at mytho-history. Go ahead.
Okay. So just in a nutshell, for your TikTok, Dr. Lindman is famous for giving this view. I don't agree with all of his reasoning. There are only 2 reasons that I buy that convince me that Genesis is mytho-history and not literal history, not pure myth. So mytho-history is It contains historical elements, the people, the main essential gist of the events. These are all historical, as evidenced by the genealogies and stuff like that. But the secondary details can be mythical. So things like the snake. In Genesis chapter 3, the snake is a creature. It's not, I think it's symbolic of Satan, but it doesn't literally speak of Satan. It's literally speaking of a snake, a creature, if you just read the text. And the second reason I think it's mytho-history is the cherubim. Those can't be literal either. And the reason for that is that I find persuasive is, well, cherubim were on the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. That's prohibited. You can't have any images of any creature on heaven or on earth. Otherwise, that's idolatry. So the only way that makes sense is to say, well, the cherubim weren't really real creatures. They were mythical things, and that's why it was okay to have them on that. So those are the two things that convinced me.
That's interesting. And how does that relate to Genesis 1 when you're reading the creation account?
Well, it's because Genesis 1 to 11 follows sort of the formula of mytho-history that Assyriologists, this is a secular genre, right? Assyriologists from the 19th century have kind of identified that there is this genre, and it seems to match the criteria of it. Like, for example, the Eurydice and that sort of thing. So based on the form and style, literary style and stuff like that, we can tell that those chapters are linked as being the same genre.
Okay. So do you still say that there is an element of historical narrative too, though, right?
For sure, yeah. And that it's not myth. This isn't a Hebrew myth.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that, right? So this is
right.
Technical thing. Yeah. It takes historical people and events, and
but they're using mytho imagery to kind of describe something probably you wouldn't be able to comprehend otherwise.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I see what you're saying. Right on. Yeah. So how that relates to the entire view of Genesis, where would you land on old Earth, young Earth?
So I'm definitely old Earth in terms of the interpretation. That comes in through with the mytho-history genre. That's not a problem in terms of interpreting the days symbolically or whatever. I do think this will be controversial. David Paulman will hate me, but I honestly do think that if we're taking it as literal history genre, I do think the best interpretation is the young Earth interpretation of the days of Genesis. I know you're not going to like that, but
why would you say that?
Oh, well, I didn't research that, but I remember Jonathan Sephardi's book, Refuting Compromise, like against Hugh Ross. I was just persuaded by those arguments. I think that is what the text is trying to say from a literal perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard of that book. So you want to tell the audience a little bit about it, or what?
Oh, so Jonathan Sephardi, he's a young Earth creationist and a scientist. He works for Answers in Genesis and stuff like that.
Well, of course, yeah.
And I'm not disrespecting. I do find the old Earth interpretations plausible and workable. I just think it comes down to what do I think is the most probable, and I found the arguments on the young Earth side to be more persuasive. Again, assuming it's literal history. So obviously, how did I deal with that before I found out about the mytho-history thing? Because the scientific evidence, I think, very strongly favors an old Earth. So I was just cool with saying, well, there's an error on that or something like that. So that's how I dealt with it.
I see.
What's your take on the days? Because I know you.
I am almost 90% in line with you, Ross.
Gotcha.
So I think that's the most persuasive that I have found. So I know a lot of people go after they like Walton's view and so forth. We'll get into that as we start describing the days, but I think Ross hits the nail on the head. It's just, and when I look at creation, okay, now this is just a personal thing. It's not don't mark it as theological, and I'm still able to be convinced otherwise. But as I see a God that is dealing with humanity in its infancy, he gives them a way to understand creation events, but you'll also see snapshots of what he was doing in nature, not only by examining nature, but by the biblical narrative, right? So you'll see like a water cycle, described as we'll be reading, and you'll see the days uh, are longer periods of time. I just think that you'll be able to see those, that they won't end up contradicting each other, but they'll end up flowing together once we truly understand how Genesis was written and how we are supposed to take it.
Gotcha. And I should clarify for the audience. So I'm not speaking of myself today. When I made this evaluation, I did this over like 11 years ago or something, back before I lost my faith, when I was a Christian, and I had a bias for young earth creationism. That's what the church I grew up in and that sort of thing. So when I did my investigation, I wasn't doing necessarily a fair, balanced investigation like I would try to do now. I was strictly trying to, if the young earth creationism was possibly true, then it was true. So, and that's not how you're supposed to do it. So I might be totally wrong. Maybe Hugh Ross's thing works. If I were to study it today, I would be more persuaded by that. So.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it, man. I do want to cover the scripture. I mean, we're about a half an hour in, which, we're rocking this pretty fun. I'm having a good time, but let's go. The creation, guys. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. All right, so that's where I'm going to stop, because there's so much packed in here, and I think that it's worthy of dissecting piece by piece here. So you look at, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Dale, take it away, man. I'll let you give your first thoughts.
So yeah, I think the main thing that comes up here is this traditional Christian doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, which contrasts with virtually all the pagan creation myths and stuff like that, where it's creatio ex materia. You're creating out of pre-existing materials, or out of some chaotic sea or something like that, or a cosmic egg, whatever you want to say. But the creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, is what really stands out for me. I would want to ask you a question about your take on that. Like, what does that mean? Because I think that it's not true. Some people misunderstand the doctrine and think creation out of nothing is like some kind of substance. There was God, and then there was nothing, and God took nothing and changed it into something, into the universe. That's not what the doctrine is saying. There is no thing. There is literally just God.
Right.
And God created out of his own power.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, he decided to create, and in that instance of creation, everything came into existence. I'm fully on board with that.
Gotcha. So
yeah,
so here's the tricky part then. So if the universe is created out of God and his power, why wouldn't it be creatio out of Deus, or whatever the saying is? Creatio ex Deus.
Because I think that we're in this realm, right? We exist in this realm, right? And this is the realm we're talking about, that came from nothing, right? So God speaks, the universe comes into being, right? So that would technically be out of nothing, I don't think it came from God's bosom and flowed out, Yeah. So you know what I mean? I think that would give rise to even a pantheism. You know,
Exactly.
it could really easily give rise to a pantheism. So that's where I think creatio ex nihilo is important for Christians to understand, because I've heard the same issue where someone's saying, well, you know, if there's always God, he created it, you know, how did he create it from nothing? You know, the universe came from something, it came from God. And we're like, yeah, there was an eternal first cause. That's always what we're saying, but he created this realm out of nothing. He had nothing to work with. He didn't grab this matter and squeeze it together and produce it. You know, he didn't take this substance or this substance. No, he spoke, and it just boom, it happened. You know.
Exactly. Yeah, and you made such a great point. Yeah, this is what differentiates us from pantheism, panentheism, or even some Christians. I listened to a very interesting show with Travis, and he had a guest on who was a theistic idealist. So they're saying creation is their ideas in God's head. He's dreaming, or their thoughts, or something like that. And I think that's opposed to the creatio ex nihilo. It's no, we're external. We are separated ontologically, so to speak, from God. We are external to God. We're not a part of God, which I think some people might get confused with.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, I mean, I hear you. One of the things that I really saw in this is the created the heavens and the earth, right? So when you look at that as an old earth creationist, you know, you see that Jewish idiom, you know, when heaven and earth are combined, it's combined like 9 times in other places, and what it's talking about is reality. You know, it's not giving you a specific, okay, God made heaven first, and then he came and he started working with the earth and stuff like that, and then, you know, it gives way to skeptics being able to say, hey, you know, day 4 is when he created the sun, moon, and stars. No, I think all physical reality is contained in this Jewish idiom, and people like Gleason Archer agree, and you know, he's an expert on the Hebrew and stuff like that. And then you have you know, other historical Jewish scholars that also say that. And so the lexicons, you can look in the lexicons and you can find that heavens and earth are always contrasted with that when they're together like that, in that used in that phrase. So I think we have good evidence to say that when you look at in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And, you know, I think you covered the most important thing is the in the beginning part. You know, we always had God, you know, and creatio ex nihilo, I think, is very important. And then heavens and the earth would be the secondary issue, which would cover the fight we have within the body about whether the earth is young or old, and how does this apply. So when you have heavens and the earth, I think that's a statement of reality. You know, that's all of reality.
Yeah, I fully agree. That's even one of my professors, who's a Hindu, even said that this distinguishes the Bible from like Eastern religions and that sort of thing. And when it does speak about the heavens and the earth, that is the totality, the universe that's in mind. That they just didn't have the language for the universe. But yeah, I agree.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but as English-speaking people, and I don't know if, Dale, you speak French because you're part of Canada there.
Quebecois. They're more refined than those frog eaters over in France. But
oh, that's a little racist.
No, oh, sorry, don't kill me.
No, seriously. Yeah, so we have a very big vocabulary. You know, I think it's something over like 4 million words or whatever in our vocabulary in the English language, and the Hebrews didn't have that. So there's a lot of times when they use one word and it's going to mean something different. You know, like I think day is in Genesis alone is 4 different times. It's used in 4 different ways, 4 different times, you know. So I mean, we have that to consider, and these things you just can't pass over. You know, whether you're a young earther or an old earther, you have to deal with the language of the time, and I think that's the important thing. And wherever you land, if you've done your studies on that, and wherever you land, I respect you more because you've actually done your research. You're able to explain, okay, this is why I'm still a young Earth creationist. This is why I'm an old Earth creationist,
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I have a lot more respect for people that actually take the language of Genesis into consideration. So,
For sure.
Dale?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. Like I said, it's been more than a decade since I got into that, but I definitely did when I was studying the things. I took Genesis to be literal history, and I wanted to know. And I was an inerrantist, so I didn't have the option of saying, well, it's just an error, which is what I did until I came across the mytho-history thing. But yeah, you need to get into what the words actually mean, how they function in context. That's always important because you can't just take a word and look at the semantic range, and then you get into a whole bunch of trouble on that front.
Oh, yeah. You gotta relate it to the context. Absolutely. So, verse 2 we covered as well. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. So we go from creation of reality to now we're on this dark planet somewhere, and it gives you a sense of formlessness. And what do you think about that?
So verse 2. Sorry, my eyes messed up again. So the earth
It's
was
okay, buddy.
without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And you're at, what is your question about that?
No, I was just wondering, what do you think about that verse? I mean, we've come from the creation of reality to this dark, formless type planet. And what do you notice there right off the bat?
Yeah, so I think what you're getting at is like Tony Costa and Scholar. There's kind of like a change in perspective. Is that what you're trying to get? So we go
Absolutely,
from a God's level perspective to from the surface of the earth now and void. There's also the point about the Spirit of God, which might be in a hint about the Trinity and stuff in this verse as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's good to point that out, that there is a perspective change, and this sets the tone for the rest of the chapter. It's kind of like from Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, we get a look of from the outside looking in, right? And now we're on the inside looking up, and we're watching God do it all, and I think that's what they're originally going for. I think that's what the authors intended, is that you're standing around looking at God create. So I think and here's a snapshot, and Travis would be happy with me using the word snapshot here, but a snapshot of a watery surface. It's formless, and the planet's all water. And I think that's reflective of an early planetary truth. I do think that studies in, I think it was 2011, Travis can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe 2013, but they discovered that, the Earth was covered with water at some point, totally covered in water. So I look at that and I'm just like, wow, there's no contradiction between what we discover in nature and what we see in Genesis 1, but a confirmation. So I think it's really interesting that you would see a story develop that actually confirms what we experience in reality.
Gotcha. Yeah, another thing that comes up here, it's face of the deep. So some people, skeptics, might try to say, well, this is just copying the myth. It's this pagan notion of like chaos represented by water, stuff like that. What do you make of someone who might say like that? Like if you have this water world or something, that's just what the pagans believed.
Well, if the pagans believed that the earth was covered with water, which I don't know of any paganism that actually teaches that the earth was covered with water, they look at chaos and matter, and I don't think they're looking at it as just water. I think they're looking at it as in like the gods are fighting, and there's a lot more to that. So they would have to go find me some sort of primary source that would explain exactly where they're coming from, because I'd want to know that there's definitely a clear cut interpretation here in Genesis that the earth was formless and without void. And if you want to call that chaos, that's fine. I don't care however you label it, but I think that we have this perspective change. We have God that's creating all of reality, and now we're looking from that perspective. We're looking up and we're seeing that the earth was covered in water. And if a pagan got that right too, congratulations. But I don't think they can prove borrowing or stealing or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that change in perspective is really revealing here, because they're seeing the universe itself as this primordial deep. So water was kind of symbolic of that. So that is a thing. Like, even the Jews are traditionally, like, at that time, kind of hesitant about being on water and stuff like that. So there is this motif, but yeah, there's no proof that there's copying, and Genesis itself is distinguishing. When the pagans talk about the water, that's like a cosmic perspective, whereas this is specifically the planet Earth. So that's a key difference there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But yeah, that perspective change too. It also, it really does reflect. And I forgot where I was going with this, so we'll just move on to verse 3. Okay. Sorry, I was going to go somewhere with that, but I can't remember what it was. But hey, that's the price of trying to read and do a live podcast. Is sometimes you'll lose stuff as you're trying to read. So
it'll come back to you.
It will come back to me. And once I saw the next verse, because it's really cool, and then God said, "Let there be light." I was just like, wow, God. And there was light, right? And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. So we get day 1 almost completed here. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning when on the first day. So that's interesting. Why would, and this is where we get to, we have to start looking at what the people are talking about when they're doing literal 24-hour days, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to get into Yom. But first, when God says, "Let there be light," what are you imagining at this point?
What do I imagine? So
yeah, I mean, what is your take when we see that?
So I think that the source of light, I know that young earth creation is. So like one thing that they'll say is, well, how could there be light before the sun? Because the sun isn't created until day 4. I'm guessing we haven't gotten there yet, but
and we probably won't this one.
Yeah, okay. So I think that it's possible to say that God is the source of light in this case, and that could solve potentially a problem with young earth creationism. But not getting into that issue, I don't see any problem in thinking that God is the source of light. Definitely, we hear Jesus.
Okay, so let me just question you and push back just a little bit on that.
Sure, of course.
So did God make himself light? Did he just turn on himself? Or was he always light? Because the verse is pretty clear that he said, God said, "Let there be light." And don't we have, let there be light, right? So if he was already hovering over the face of the waters, there already had been light. There's no point in saying, "Let there be light," if there was already light, because the Spirit was hovering over the face of the waters. See, this is where I would differ with young earth creationists here. I truly think that God is letting the light pierce the atmosphere for the first time. You're going from that
opaque to...
Yeah, I really think that's kind of what we're describing. And if you look at Job, which is also an ancient account, you'll see that the common belief there, and this is where I may differ from Ross a little bit. I think that he puts a lot of stock, and maybe I'm wrong, because Hugh's one of my heroes, man. I mean, it's just there's no doubt about it. I've had him on the show and everything.
Yeah, I respect him too, even when I disagree. Yeah. I respect him. I respect his views. He's someone to consider for sure.
Yeah, and I may differ just slightly, but I'm looking at it more like my friend Travis, kind of like a snapshot. Like we see that, okay, the culture did believe that the early Earth, I mean, at least in this culture, and this is the problem when we're examining these cultures like this, and when we do social or socio-historical background checks here, and we want to kind of incorporate that in, is that we don't know the minority views. We don't know the nuanced views that kind of influence the majority view at that time. They've either been lost to history or whatever. But when we look at it, we can see that there may have been some other views, that influence the main view. We can kind of like see threads of it. You know what I mean? And even though you can't really put your finger on it, what I see here is that Job account, they really did believe, at least a group did believe, that the earth was surrounded by thick darkness of clouds, and that's reflected in Job chapter 37 or 38, I believe.
Okay.
What do you think?
So I would need to look up the Job passage specifically. Like I know that young earthers try to use the canopy. I don't believe in that or anything like that, obviously. So let me just say that in terms of your interpretation, I see it as an equally probable explanation. You could be right, especially given the change in perspective in verse 2. But I still see that the young earthers could explain this. I don't think that your objection about, turning on the light, like there's a beginning to the light. It doesn't have to be that God was eternally light. There could be a beginning. Photons came into existence. That's what light is. So I don't see that as a reason to rule out God being the source of light, kind of thing. So maybe you're right. Maybe they're right, at least in terms of this verse in isolation.
Yeah. So when you think about that, though, I mean, if God is the source of the light, wouldn't it have already been on the planet? So that was my objection. What do you think about that?
Well, because he's not essentially physical light. So I'm saying, like, physical light, the photons came into.
So he turned himself on. He kind of cued it.
Yeah. Let there be light. Let there be light.
He's a Q from Star Trek.
Is that so ridiculous? Why?
No, it's not. I just got a kick out of it because that's what came to my mind here.
Okay, yeah, that's I think what Genesis is saying. Let there be light, kind of thing, and something physical was immediately happened. Whether you think that was the parting of the clouds or you think photons.
I think you're right about that. Yeah, I think you're right about that. But yeah, I mean, there are two areas that you're going to have to make your own mind up on, audience. And it's good that we cover multiple perspectives. So, you do think it's that God is being the source of light here? Is this your interpretation, or are you kind of open to anything at this point?
So I'm kind of open to it on a literary level, like just reading what I think the author of Genesis is saying. But when I'm throwing in secular scientific knowledge, where I'm an old earther, I think it's very, very strong, or very, very probable that the universe is old and that the earth is old and that sort of thing. So that creates a problem, perhaps to favor your interpretation over mine, perhaps, because obviously we know that photons pre-existed the earth and that we have the CMB radiation, for example, 400,000 years. So once you throw in that could, the scientific evidence could tip the scales. But if I'm just talking about literarily reading what I think the author of Genesis is saying, I think they're equal interpretations.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going, but it's really okay. So there's something distinct here, and this is what always it boggled my mind at first. Okay, so we get this idea that God's creating the day and the night, right? Mm-hmm. But then it continues saying, and there was evening and then there was morning. So I'm like, why kind of reiterate that? We already know that he's creating day and night. Why reiterate saying, well, then there was evening and then there was morning? And that's what got me to really like that gave me a check in my body, like they say check in your spirit, or it gave me a check. Okay, I need to look into this a little further. because why reiterate, this, and then you look at the subsequent days, and then the day or evening and morning, and you really look at it, and you see the arguments that begin to come about, and you're like, okay, I'm not the only one that had this problem. They've been debating this obviously for years, but I do think that and there's evening and there's morning are the ending of a certain era or a certain time, but it's to bring that day into conclusion. And that's the way I look at that. And it's not like in a literal, there was day and night, and that's where we get into the word y'all.
Okay. I need to reflect on this. So I if I did research it, I've totally forgotten. I'm not sure I see your point. So it's the repetition. So he's giving semantic labels. The light is day, and then the darkness is night. So he's giving it the semantic label, and then he's giving this formula that's repeated, and then there is evening and morning the first day. So why is it that you see, because he's mentioning it day and night and then evening and morning twice? How does that mean that it's not a literal day? Or I'm not sure.
I didn't say it wasn't a literal day. What I'm saying is it seems to me that it's more of a closing out of that day, as not a literal 24-hour period. That something more is going on here, at least just from my perspective.
Gotcha. Okay. So I just don't know enough to say anything intelligently to that point. You might be right. And definitely I agree with you that the text of Genesis, as John Lennox is famous as saying, this is a highly complicated text, right? So it's not
Absolutely.
it's not just
and that's what I mean by that is like that was the first thing that was just going on in my mind when I first started reading it, and this was years ago. It was like, I need to look more into this because the semantics seem off. It seems there's something that seems weird about it, because you got God making light and darkness, and he's calling it night and day, and then it concludes with, and then there was evening, and then there was morning. It just seems out of place to me. So it kind of just was weird, so it was just something that piqued my interest, and I was like, I've got to look more into this. And then after researching it, I came to the conclusion myself that this formula at the end is really concluding God's creative decree that day, or decretive act that day,
Gotcha.
So that's and that's why he's calling it day. And it was made for a way for people to understand back then. It's a hierarchical, list of events that are going on here.
Gotcha.
Which we haven't even began to cover stuff like that yet.
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, I fully agree with what you're saying. That's definitely true. That this phrase is definitely a completion phrase. That's why it's used at the end of each thing. I forget the Hebrew words. Is it evolve? No, that's something else.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay, but yeah, what you're saying is absolutely correct. And there is some level of structure between the days when we get to that, and that's where Walton's interpretation comes in and stuff like that. I think he was too far.
Yeah, so does Craig.
Yeah.
But that's it's so funny that a lot of people jumped on the Walton's view there, like pretty quick, and it just kind of like spread like wildfire. But I think Walton has some pretty interesting ideas. I don't buy the whole cosmological model, just because I think there are other views. It's kind of like hard for you to pin down exactly what view was the writer of Genesis when it comes to cosmological models at the time,
Yeah, the cosmic view. I never found it persuasive. Like ever since reading John Lennox about it, and obviously William Craig has come out against it as well. But it is very popular among scholars, like Louis Dizon, that ancient Near Eastern scholar. Like for some reason, it's a popular view in ancient Near Eastern studies, and it just never appealed to me.
Yeah, me either, man. But yeah, it's something that you have to contend with. So when you look at Genesis, let's try to wrap this up. We've got about 5 minutes left. When you look at Genesis chapter 1, I mean, what's the biggest takeaways, and what's the best way to wrap up what we see in creation day one? I think we have, on my own opinion, I think we have a model that can supplement an old Earth or a new Earth or a young Earth, and we see that there's definitely some literary genre that we have to look into, and that we have to decide maybe how to interpret it. Dale.
Yeah, I guess the biggest takeaway for me from day one is that massive doctrine of creatio ex nihilo. I think that shows the glory and magnificent power of God in creating the universe. So that's the number one thing that sort of stands out to me in terms of day one, that God just creates out of his own power. He doesn't need to use existing materials. Obviously, there's that reference to the Spirit of God, which is a nice little hint that perhaps there's a complexity to God's essence and stuff like that. Yeah, that's the most important thing for me.
So yeah, you really get that theological idea, that it's really impacts you, and I think that's important, because it does me too. After looking at the amazingness of PorA, as something new, and you do that scripture study, it really does bring to light that hey, this group of people, unlike the surrounding pagan cultures, they're saying to them, and this is where I think it's kind of a polemic in a way, right, to these other views out there, and that these guys are like, no, God did it. In the beginning was God, not your gods fighting or some chaos matter. No, in the beginning was God. And God created everything. And that's where I think that's very powerful, that these people were willing to say, no, it wasn't God's, there's just God, and he did it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's what stands out to me. That as to the interpretation of days, that's a secondary detail in my view. It's not going to make or break someone's salvation, and that. So that's what stands out to me.
Only yours.
Sorry.
Only yours.
Only mine. Yeah.
And David Palmer. Well, he's already too far gone anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm trying to reel you back in. No,
Gotcha.
I'm not kidding. But no, seriously, when you look at the end here, and I'm going to conclude with this, and then I'll let you give your final goodbye there, and then we'll wrap the show. Yeah, yom. The word yom is the Hebrew word for day, and it is used in 4 different ways almost right away in Genesis. So we've got to look carefully at how we're going about this. So yes, I don't think it matters what side of the coin you're going to fall onto when it comes to your salvation. So I just want to make that clear. It's not a salvation issue, and I think Dale is 100% right. So to give my total thought here is that Genesis 1 is definitely a unique chapter that is great to give you an idea of who God is and what he's about, and how powerful he is, and I think as we go through Genesis, we'll see different attributes of God come to light.
So just so I know, is that the plan? So next time for your topic, we're doing Genesis 2, we're going through it all. Is that?
Yeah, I'm going to try to.
Okay. All right, cool.
That's what being theology geeks are about.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, awesome. Well, next time will be my topic. I'm gonna probably I'll probably pick the doctrine of inspiration and how that works.
That sounds good. Yeah.
And then after that, I was also, because of my research for Genesis in the dating, making faces.
I was making faces at my wife. They're not to you.
Okay. I'm just like, oh man, he hates me. But I found it very interesting, the dating and historicity of the Exodus. When I was researching the dating of, Genesis, who wrote it and stuff like that. I think that
you got to be joking me, dude. You got to be joking me, dude. I was just on this too.
Oh, really?
Maybe let's do that one then.
The only thing is that's going to require a lot of research on my end. So I was maybe
is.
November. September. I'm not going to have time to research. So especially because of you got me.
So where are you landing right now? I'm really interested. Are you what is it? What's the beach? Are you for the beach into Arabia or Sinai Peninsula for the Mountain of God? Where did they cross the Red Sea?
Yeah. So I don't think, in terms of scholarships, I'm not sure that we know exactly where the mountain was. But I haven't taken a side. I need to research that. I was just thinking.
You haven't taken a side, dude. I'm starting to get pushed over again to the secondary site that in Arabia.
Okay. Through the.
I mean, it's crazy that the scorch marks are still on the rock. On that mountain,
yeah.
And it's crazy that there's an altar there. Yeah, I haven't done the full research, so people can, bash me all they want on it, but it's just very interesting. And the whole idea that there are some weird coral structures down in the bottom of that sea, whether, you conclude it's an old wheel that the coral just ate through or whatever, it is down there,
Yeah.
And that is something that is very interesting,
Yeah, I'm fascinated by the research of, we'll get into it, but Bryant Wood, for example, an archaeologist who's done a lot of research into the conquests of Jericho and Ai and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
And
very interesting stuff.
Cool. So that's what we got on the agenda for me, and Genesis 2 from David in October.
Yes, sir. Guys, again, thank you for tuning in. This is me and Dale. We are the TheoGeeks, and we're looking forward to having some of our friends come on the show as well. So look for that in the future. And guys, open mic night on PorA tonight, my return. Dale, you're welcome to be there too. But yeah, that's the show, guys. Have a good one.
All right. Take care, everybody.